everybody, welcome back to my channel. Today we're doing another macrame project, this time a sun and a moon wall hanging. I didn't actually have a pattern for this, so I just used some that I'd seen as inspiration. I did have to redo it 3 times before I was happy with the result, but I think you're gonna like this one. Let's go ahead and get started. The supplies you'll need for this project are pretty easy to find. A couple of these things I found at the Dollar Tree, like this 20-inch hula hoop that you'll need for the outside ring, and also these pieces of rope from this mop head. You'll need 2 of these for the sun on the outside. And then of course you'll need 3mm macrame rope for the moon. And then I also chose to add some beads that I had in my stash, some of these wood beads you'll need as well. So the first step is to remove the rope from the mop head. They're in there pretty tight initially, but once you start pulling on them and you get some out, they come out pretty easily. I didn't like that the mop head rope was so white in comparison to the macrame rope, which is a beige color. So I decided to use some tea to just dye the rope slightly so that it was closer to the same shade. This process is pretty easy. It doesn't take long at all to dye this cotton rope. I just used 2 large tea bags, steeped it in hot water, and then added additional cold water just so that I'd be sure that all of the rope would be submerged in the tea. I wanted to be sure to dye them all at the same time because I wanted the color to be the same across all the ropes. There's going to be variation, but you can see how fast this rope took this color. It was a matter of seconds in the tea, and the rope was starting to change colors. So it's not completely uniform, but I was okay with that. I kind of like the rustic, shade. And then I just spread them out on a towel so that I can squeeze out some of the water, and then I just let them dry. I just used the towel to squeeze out as much water as I could, and then I set them outside in the sun to dry. Once they were dry, I cut each piece in half. You'll need 100 of these shorter pieces to go around the outside of the hula hoop. And in doing that, you use about 1.5 of the mop heads. Next step is to remove this outside paper from the hula hoop. Once you get it going, it comes off pretty easily. I liked that dark gray color, so I didn't paint the hula hoop, but I did open it up and remove the little pellets that are inside because you don't want your wall hanging to be making noise when you move it. Then the next step is just to tape the hula hoop back together, and I just used, regular tape to tape it together. It held just fine. Now we're ready to start assembling. In order to work on this project, I used a clothing rack and then just tied the hula hoop onto it at the top and the 2 sides just to hold it steady. But you could actually do this on a tabletop surface as well. So the first step is to attach the mop head pieces to the hula hoop. This knot is called the lark's head knot. I'm working on the right side of the hula hoop now, so you're going to hold the 2 ends in your right hand, the loop in your left, go behind the hula hoop, and then you push the 2 ends into where the loop is in the back. You want to be sure that bump from the loop on the rope is showing on every one of them. If you happen to do it the wrong way and the 2 ends are showing instead, take it off and redo it because you want that every one of them to look the same with that bump. When you get around to the left side of the hula hoop, you're going to want to switch and put the 2 ends in your left hand and the loop in the right in order to get that uniform look where the bump is still showing on the outside. So once you have all these ropes around the whole hula hoop, you want to be sure that you're filling in enough so that the gray is not showing. So just push them closer together and continue to add ropes as you go. So here's an example of where I realized that I was doing it the wrong way. And I just took it off and redid it so that I know that that bump is going to show and be the same as all the others. So just continue to add additional ropes, pull to tighten. You know, as far as the pulling to tighten, really, I was doing that throughout the whole time, but really, you can just leave it and then just tighten them all in the end. Now that the sun is done, let's work on the moon. You're going to need 9 pieces of macrame rope to do the moon. The ones that are further to the left side need to be longer, and then those ropes that are at the points at the top and the bottom of the moon can be shorter. So you want to cut your ropes at 5 of them at 6 feet, and then the other 4 shorter at about 3 feet. But always with macrame, give yourself some extra if you're at all concerned about not having enough. It's always better to be safe than sorry, having some rope that you can cut off versus not having enough. So then what I did is I separated these ropes evenly across the left side, counting down 10 of those mop head ropes on the sun and placing another of those macrame ropes on the left side. You want to be sure that your 5th rope lands right in the center of the left side of the moon, because that's going to be the largest part of the moon. And then what I also did is I just added this string as a way for me to guide where that point was going to be starting, because I redid this 3 times, and one of the reasons I had to do that is because the first time I did it, I didn't start far enough over on the right. So I just used that string as just a guide for myself, but I take that off later. So the moon consists of a basket weave pattern, which means you take 1 rope from the left, 1 rope from the right. And all you just want to be sure that however you're doing your knots, that they're going to appear the same each time. So here you can see I'm actually working with the rope on the left, meaning the rope on the left is always the one that's doing the work, that's going around. And then you can see in both of these, the outside bump is on the left side. You want to be sure that they look the same. Then you're going to do the same thing. Take a rope from the left, take a rope from the right, and make sure that your left rope is the one that's doing all the work, and that they end up looking the same as you go. So then you have a uniform look across the whole moon. I added some wood beads to my project here. These are, I think, 6mm wood beads that I had just in my stash. And here's the tip for how you get a wood bead onto a rope. I'm just using a crochet hook. I put the bead on the hook, and then I hook the rope around and pull it through the bead. So what I'm doing here is I'm starting all the way on the far right. You can see my string showing that's where I'm starting. And I'm doing the first row because it's a curve. If you think about the rows of macrame, the first one is going to be all along the edge of that sun. And I'm going to do that same knot that I showed you a minute ago. In my case, the first time I did this project, I did not include beads. When I took it out and I did it again, I chose beads and I sort of placed them random on the moon, and I didn't really like that. So the last time I did it, I chose to put a bead on every one of this first row on that outer edge of the moon. And I think it turned out better that way. It still looks random to some extent, but there is some uniformity to it. I ended up using about 15 beads on my project. As I'm going along, I'm tying these knots pretty tight, especially on that outer edge. Again, that was a lesson I learned as I went along. I liked it better the tighter it was, because you really want the moon to start curving in towards the edge of the sun, so you get a really clear crescent there. So now you can tell I'm on what would be considered the second row here. And this second row did not get a bead. As I go, I'm going to continue on, and I'm just making sure that my knots look the same. Now I'm going to continue and complete that first row all the way down the left side. As I mentioned, in my case, I put a bead on each of the intersections along that left side in that first row. So I've added another bead. I'm just checking to make sure that I'm doing my knot correctly so that the bump ends up on the left side and all the knots look the same. As I get to the bottom of this first row, I decide to make sure that the bump on the knot is still on the left. So in actuality, this is backwards from what the others are, but since this is the way it's going to appear when it's hanging, I would suggest you do it that way. So just again, the whole thing appears to look the same with that bump on the left. So once we have that in place, we have completed our first row. For my project, I did not place any beads in the second row. All I did was, again, combine the rope on the left with the rope on the right and finish that whole second row. And then the same thing on the bottom, I just did the reverse to make those knots on the bottom. One of the things, just a reminder, I don't have a pattern for this, and I think everybody's project is going to be unique either way. So just do what you like. Add beads as you think you should, or as, however many you like. That's what's most important here. At this point, I wasn't exactly sure how I was going to deal with that last rope on the outer edge. I wanted that to be a point of that crescent moon. So I left those just hanging for now and moved on to this third row, working along the wider part on the left. In doing this, I also made the decision that in this row, I was going to add a few beads along that wider part. So I didn't put them in the more narrow part, but I did put them in the wider part. And that was partly because I took these beads from my stash and I had a limited number of beads. So I just kind of placed them randomly, but you decide how many beads you want to place on your moon. In the end, I ended up placing 4 beads on that row. And once that row was done, we could move on to the next row. There are only 6 rows total at the widest part of the moon. And obviously at the point here at the top, there's even fewer rows. So at this point, I'm trying to figure out, I have these 3 ropes all the way up at this point, and I really only want 2 of them. So that middle rope, what I decide to do is just weave it into the bead and then tie it off there at the top, because I want that curve and that point to be starting right away. So if I get rid of one of those ropes, it will still create the diamond by using the left and the right rope to start that next row. So here I'm just tying that knot, and I'll tie off that other rope that I pushed through the bead later as we go along. Since I didn't have a pattern for this, I'm just adding knots as I feel they need to be added. Next up, we're going to add another rope here to the top. This rope you should cut at 200 inches long. One side would be 150 inches, and the second one would be the rest, the 50 inches. The shorter one will be what will create the foundation chain for the inside of the curve of our moon. The longer one we will use to make the knots. The knot we will do here is called a half hitch knot. You curve the rope on the right, under the rope on the left, and then you pull it through. That's the half hitch knot. And we're going to continue to make half hitch knots all the way down this rope. But as we come across the ropes that are hanging, we want to tie those in. So in order to start here, I add the half hitch to that initial rope that was the furthest one to the right. And as we're going along, we're just going to keep adding on these other ropes. So here I'm trying to decide whether it's close enough to that rope that I should add it in now, or whether I should do another half hitch before I get to that rope. So what I'm trying to do is make that curve as clean as I can, but also attach the ropes at the right place so that the tension of the rope attaching to that inner curve will be correct. So here I'm now completing a half hitch. My center is now the foundation chain and the rope that was coming from my weave pattern on the moon. So you're going to go along as you're doing this. You just keep adding those half hitch along the edge. And as you get to another piece of rope here, you're going to add it in. At this point, I'm just going to complete some more of the knots in the center of the moon just to be sure that I have those done. I wasn't exactly sure how much of a curve I would want here, so I left those knots undone until this point. So this was the hardest part, creating this foundation and these half hitch along this edge and just figuring out exactly where to put the half hitch, where to add the ropes in. It's all, you're just gonna have to play with it as you go until you get it to the point where you like it. For that middle part there, you don't want more than 2 ropes in that center part, the foundation chain and one that you've picked up. So once we get to that next rope that we need to add in, we're actually going to drop the one from above so that we can add the next one in. We're just going to push that rope to the back and we'll cut it eventually, but for right now we're just going to leave it hanging down. So now we're going to pick up that next rope, add it in with that foundation chain and continue along the edge here. I'm trying to decide again whether or not it is in the right place. I think it is because I do want to pull those half hitch and that inner curve so that it is as close to the edge. I want it to be a pretty defined curve here. So the tighter I pull it, the better. And again, you just have to keep working with it as you go to make sure that you've got it pointing or working its way towards the left. If you feel the rope is too far away from the weave pattern on the left, you can always add another knot onto that left side so that you're bringing your chain as close to it as possible, but that you're keeping that curve as straight as you can. Since there is a bead there at the top so close to this edge, I decided to add a couple more beads onto this row. So I add one here on the upper edge, and then I'll add a bead down lower to the middle on the bottom as well. Just to add, again, a couple more beads. I tried to make the beads look random but also consistent, and at this point I was running out of beads. So if you have more beads, add more if you want, but I kind of liked it like this. I've worked my way down to the bottom half now of this curve, and to be honest, this was the hardest part because There were just so many ropes and I was trying to figure out how to get it to curve correctly. I did add this last bead on. Like I said, I had one halfway on the top half side and one down here on the bottom half. And I think that turned out well. But I also wanted to mention I was having trouble because some of my ropes were shorter than they would have been. Because I did this 3 times, the first time I did it, I did cut some of these ropes as I was going. And then when I redid it, my ropes were already shorter. So just so you know, if you're looking at this and thinking, oh my gosh, those ropes are so short, that's one of the reasons, because I had already done some trimming from when I had done it earlier. I think if you cut them at the 6 feet or the 3 feet, you should be fine. But like I said, always err on the side of cutting them a little longer just to have some extra rope as you need it. So now I'm just going to continue going down the bottom, just as I had that trouble at the very top where I had that extra rope and didn't exactly know what to do with it. I was having that problem here as well. I knew I only wanted to have the 2 ropes in the center at any given time, so I'm adjusting as I go, but you just have to keep playing with this. To put it on, take it off if you need to, move it around just until you get the curve as close to a clean curve as you can. It's not going to be perfect, but like I've always said, you know, perfect is boring. We're not looking for perfect here. So just get it as close as you can. Okay, when you get to this bottom part, what is most important is that you keep in mind you want that point at the very end. You want to get really close to the edge of your rope here, just like we did at the very beginning. So you're going to keep your half hitch all the way along that edge, getting very close and pulling those rope, those little pieces of rope as close into that half hitch chain as you can. When I got to the end here, I had very little rope left over, and that one I had not cut. So this is the piece we cut at 200 inches. You may want to give yourself another 10 or 20 inches here just in case. Then I removed that string that I was using as a guide. And then I just cut off all these tails. Remember, we had tucked them in so they're secure, they're not going to be going anywhere. And I just go down the center here and cut all of those off. So just to finish it off, I'm just making this little hanger at the top. I put a knot so that there is a hook at the top. And I only have one of the smaller beads left, but I do have a couple that are a little bit larger. I used my embroidery hook to pull the rope through. You need to pull actually both ends of the rope through the hook, but so I'm showing how to do it here. But in the end, I realized that I didn't like the just one bead, so I did add those 2 larger beads. So it's a little more substantial. I have the 3 beads and then the tail, which I use to tie on to the project. So at the center top, I just attach it with the knot so that it won't show in the back, and then I cut off the tails. And then we're done. This project might be a little more challenging. I thought so too. It did take me a little while to figure it out, but I know you can do it, and I hope you give it a try. As always, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate your support. If you haven't subscribed yet, please consider doing so that you'll be notified each time I upload a new video. Thanks everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.